I'm Trish McGirr, and I'm going to talk about repossessions and distressed assets. And it's good that Mark's talking about lease options, because I am going to talk about creative strategies as we go through this presentation. Now, I'm going to warn you, for those of you who are of a sensitive disposition, I'm going to talk about death and debt. I might even do the death theme, but I promise I won't lie down. I won't fully reenact it. But there's a real theme. And it's funny, because as Kirsty just said, lots of opportunity to offer below market value or below real value in the marketplace right now, but let's be sensitive how you do that. So I'm going to talk through not just what repossession rescue is and why I do what I do, because ultimately I'm an investor. I want to talk about the power that investors have in their hands, in your hands right now, to not just go out there and make some really good deals, but to do something amazing for a lot of people who need your help. And I'll give you some figures. £1.9 billion. What does that, if you've heard me speak before, don't say what it is. But 1.9 billion, what do you think I'm referring to?
Repossessed properties.
It would include repossessed properties, but 1.9 billion is actually the value of the debt industry in the UK, 1.9 billion a year. And it is set to grow by up to 24% in the next 12 months. What does that tell you about the economy? What does it tell you about people's ability to manage the finances? You know, we look a lot at the economics, don't we? We look at what the house market is doing. But to know what's happening to the housing market, it's good to know how people are managing their debt, because it's one of the greatest predisposition to what's going to come next. And I've been saying for several years now, a financial tsunami as far as the house market is coming, or the property market is coming, is on the way. Because we've been drunk on cheap money and lower than average interest rates for a very long time now. And the government only have one strategy to control runaway inflation, and that's to continue to raise the interest rates. So we've had all this cheap money, all this free money, all this pay it later kind of stuff. Do you ever remember Wonga that went out of business, right? You know, basically it's going to be super cheap because you borrow 100 and you only pay back 110, but actually if you don't pay back then, it'll then be 150, then it's capitalised on that, then it's 250, and by the end of the year, for 100 quid, you'll pay back £4,689. So this is where we're at right now in the cycle in terms of what's happening behind the scenes and what the impact is on people's finances. You don't have to have lived under a rock to see this. Now, I think we have a bad rap in the investment game, don't we? We've a bit of we get people going, all you capitalist investors out there preying on the vulnerable, you know, knocking people down on the price of their houses. You only want to drive a good deal. And we're all there, aren't we? We're all there like this with our £50 notes shoved under the thing because we don't want the tax man to know we've got it. And I think the perception is something we need to challenge and we need to change. And as I go through my little thing, I'm going to say this is why. Because at my lowest part in my life, an investor helped me start again. And that's the message that I see week in and week out from investors that I speak to when they ring me up and they say, Trish, I've got a deal. I'm not sure how to handle it. I think the seller is vulnerable. I need some advice. I need some help. What do you think I can do with this? And I start with the premise that, number one, investors are the savior of the economy and the universe. Get your big pants on, get a cape, it's all good. And again, a lot of investors who come into property come in not just with intentions of enriching ourselves, but of giving something back to our family, our communities, and indeed, how many of us rent to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to find somewhere to live, right? How many of us do that in this room right now? How many of you rent to, how many of you do HMOs, or do social housing, or are interested in social impact investing? Right? Quite a few. And I think this is the message that the public doesn't see. What they see is investors are driving up the price of houses, but they're also driving people out of affordability. Really? That's the single reason for where we're at right now? Kirsty's just said it's not. You know, people are struggling. They're overinflating prices now, not because that's necessarily what the property is worth, but it's what they need to get out of it, or what they'd like to get out of it. So I want to say an investor helped me start again. This little house here, by the way, it was really funny because this doorway is so low that I nearly banged my head on it. And I'm 5 foot. My husband says I'm not 5 foot, but I do that when I stand on a thing. So this little house it is in the Rosendale Valley in Lancashire. And I came across that little house when I was at a very low point in my life. The interest rate was 14% on my home at the time. But I'm going to weave my story into this presentation rather than do the bit which says I'll give you my credibility and then I'll talk about the deal. So I'm going to talk about that later. Because the investor that helped me out had something that I didn't have. He had the knowledge, he had the property, and he had the willingness to give someone a chance who otherwise nobody else could have helped. The banks couldn't help me because I was in arrears. I didn't really have the money to continue to clear those arrears. I was in negative equity. I was paying higher than I could afford to pay on this house, and my credit was completely screwed. So whenever I found that little house, I was in dire straits because my credit was so that I couldn't go to most landlords, because most agents would say the same thing. You know, you're not a good credit risk, even though I had a full-time job. Even though I could show that I was earning some money and I was trying to work my way out of it, it was no. I went to Bolton Council saying, if I can't get my finances together, I'm going to be homeless and I've got an 18-month-old baby on my hip. And they went, you've got a full-time job, we can't help you either. You're not a priority. You're not a priority. I could get that, I understand that. You've got a job. You must be able to go and get a house somewhere else. And I went, but I can't. I keep getting turned down. And it was by the grace of God that I found that house. And this is part of my story and part of why it was surprising to me, or maybe not surprising, that after years and years of struggling to get back on my feet, I ended up in the property world, and I ended up doing for some people what an investor did for me. And I think that is the story I want to keep telling you today. Because one of the things that you have speed. You can work quickly. Banks don't go quickly. Solicitors sometimes don't go quickly. Only the good ones, right? So sometimes the wheels grind very, very slowly when someone is desperate for a solution. And when you're desperate for a solution, every single day that ticks by potentially is a day closer to you reaching the point of no return in terms of your finances. So you can do due diligence, as we said before. You've got tools, you've got things that help you look at what the property is doing, what the property market in that area is doing, what the rental values in that area is doing. You've got the ability to do all this sitting at the comfort of your home. Again, as Kirsty just said, you can sit at home, you can evaluate deals, and you go, those ones definitely I can't really help with. Those ones are the ones of interest. You can do that really quickly nowadays. But you can signpost people. One thing you can do for everybody who comes your way, whether they are a distressed seller or not, if they say, look, I'm really not sure my business is going to survive, which is why we need to sell, you can signpost them to services to help them. I think it's a fallacy to think that everybody knows that they can go to citizen advice. People think, oh, you can go to citizen advice. Yeah, most people say that, but most people don't go for fear of being judged, the stigma attached to it, for fear of being turned away, for fear of citizen advice being so busy they can't actually offer you any help. But you can signpost people to sources of other financial advice, like Step Change Debt Charity. Have any of you heard of that? Step Change? Right? You can signpost people. And one thing I would appeal to every investor here is to have on your website, somewhere, on your little blog, here's a good idea for a bit of content. Post some content about the current economy and what people who are in trouble can do. Because I'm going to tell you now, it won't stop people doing business with you. They'll still want to do business with you, but you'd help them along the way. And what's bad about that? The other thing is viable exits. Nowadays, you don't just have to purchase. You could do a lease option. You could do a joint venture. You could do a planning gain. You could do a million other things that nowadays there's training available for all of that if you decide you want to learn more. When it happened to me, I didn't know anything about property. I was a nurse. That's all I knew. But it's good skills, but I didn't know anything about property. And more importantly, I was so afraid I'd lose my job. I sat there and I kept my mouth shut for way longer than I should have done. And as a result of that, I felt complete shame when someone said, why didn't you do something sooner? Instead of me opening up, I actually felt even worse. So I closed down even more. And that's what happens when you stigmatize people who are in debt or who can't manage their finances or whose business is about to go to the wall. I want to bring you up to date with some numbers. Q3 2023, new numbers out now. 17,000 people in individual voluntary arrangements. Do you know what an IVA is? Does anybody not know what an IVA is? An IVA, yeah, okay. An IVA, individual voluntary agreement, is basically where you come to an agreement with your creditors about how you're going to settle your debts. It's not bankruptcy, but it does affect your credit file, and it's basically overseen by a practitioner. So it's not bankruptcy, but it's kind of the step, if you don't get it right, that's where you end up. 7,100 debt relief orders. So again, this is where you're mandated by a court to pay your debts in a specific way. 1,800 bankruptcies. This is in the last quarter. The last quarter. This is everyday folk like you and me. Lots of them are business owners. Lots of them are people who own property. Maybe they don't own lots of property. They may own one or two. So it's happening all over. And there were 21,000 breathing space registrations. So the breathing space is where you can go and you can say, I'm in debt, and you can get a place in a breathing space, and they go through all of your debts, all of your income, and they work out with your creditors what you can afford to pay. And for a period of time, your creditors are not allowed to take any further enforcement action on you. Now, that period of time can last several months. If you have mental health issues, it can last longer. But it's not a solution to your debt. It just means you literally get a bit of time to get yourself together. So there's a lot of things out there that we can do. And again, released in August, in terms of arrears, 81,000 people in arrears of 2.5% or more of their mortgage. And 30,000 between, up to 5% and more. So the number's growing. The number's growing. And even though a lot of the institutions have implemented new ways to help people deal with their debt, so there are more payment holidays available for people, there are more services out there, but that's still not going to be enough to save a significant number. So I don't want to be too much on the stats, because I'm not a statistician, but these are just hot off the press. This is literally August, so you know where we're at. Buy to let, over nearly 9,000 people in arrears. And again, just those numbers combined is 12,000. It's 12,000 landlords. Doesn't sound like a lot, but in that is a mixture of individual buy-to-let properties and portfolios. And commercials will be the same. In terms of repossessions on homes, the number of homeowners has gone down. The reason being that a lot of the banks have now implemented some more forgiveness. So they're saying, like, we can give you a payment holiday. We can fix you on a better rate of interest, which softens the blow for some people. We can capitalise your arrears and put them onto the end of the mortgage, which means your rates go up, but it's over a longer period of time. So there's a lot of things that banks are trying to do and have been encouraged to do. Sadly, not in the buy-to-let market. It's unregulated. They think if you've got a buy-to-let property, it's because you've got another one. Not thinking if that's your income's just gone down the tubes, right? So, and again, if you've got tenants, if you're renting, tenants are 4 times more likely at the minute to have financial problems. Loads of them are having problems, even meeting a bill, an unexpected bill, but necessary one. They're saying, I can't afford it. And the number of credit cards that are now going up, the actual credit card debt is going up exponentially, because people will max out every available line of credit to them. They'll borrow from family, they'll borrow from friends, they'll go on a 0% interest credit card, and then they'll max that out. They'll do a balance transfer on it, and then they'll max another one out. And they will do everything they can to keep going, because this is human nature. Again, I'm not going to spend your time going through every one, but it's really important to recognise behind that backdrop is a real person with a family and a life, and they are trying to make things work long enough for the tide to turn. But at the minute, the tide's turned the other way, because the cost of living has gone up, the interest rates have gone up, and therefore, no matter what they do, you're always backpedaling. And that was, again, the situation I was in. I've said for a while now, over 700,000 households are at risk of repossession. Households, how many people in a household? On average in the UK? 3, 2.5 to 3. So imagine 2.1 million people losing their homes. Where would they go? Where would they go if not into rented? So do you see what I mean? You guys hold the key to solving potentially some massive, massive issues. We're still behind on house building. And even if we weren't behind on house building, these people can't buy houses. The credit's screwed, and it will be for the next 5 years. Where do they go? Rented. Is there enough public sector housing for them? No, of course not. So what do we need? We need you guys to buy the properties that they will end up vacating. You've got to do it. because you have the speed and you have the ability and you have the motivation, and by the way, you get paid in the process of doing that. What's bad about that? Nothing, nothing. So if I put that into context, if 770,000 households, that would be the population of Nottinghamshire. Imagine the whole of the population of Nottinghamshire losing their home. But I say it's 3 times that, because you'd imagine the kids. Anybody here got a dog or a cat or a pet they dearly, dearly love? Right? Go try renting from a landlord who says, I won't take cats or dogs. And the fringe knock-on effect is, this could be, you could be on your own, you could have lost your house, you could have the only companion left to you in the world, you've got to go and find somewhere to rent, no one will rent to you because your credit's screwed, and you've got a pet. And that pet then ends up getting surrendered to a charity. Don't know about you, but I think that pretty much sucks, right? Because I'm a dog rescuer and I know how I feel. So, as I say, it's not just that, it's all the other knock-on effects that it has. Again, just to give you a last couple of bits, there are about 300,000 interest-only loans set to mature over the next 3 to 5 years. Those people are effectively called mortgage prisoners. They can't refinance where they're at now, and the likelihood is they won't be able to refinance at the end of the term because the full balance that's left on the mortgage, in other words, the amount they borrowed, will become due for payment in the next 3, 4, 5 years. Whoops. Now, unless the government comes out and the institutions come out with a brand new product for later life borrowers, and we don't get a massive dip in the property values, some of those people may be able to refinance, but they'll probably have to refinance on a longer term with a family guarantor or whatever. So again, I'm not an economist, but I'm screaming like, why can't anybody else see this shit, right? What the hell's going on in the world that we're not saying this? And as I say, but that's a lot of property to get your teeth into, right? From the people who are interest only, from the people who can no longer afford it, from the people who want to rent and need to rent and have to rent. That's a lot of property out there for you guys to get your hands on, right? Why aren't you all singing at this point? Hallelujah, let's go and get some of that. Because there's a lot of things you can do. Fast purchase, there's nothing wrong with a below market value deal. Except, what does below market value mean to you? What does it mean to anybody? Below market value, I like what you were saying, Christy, about 40%. There's nothing wrong with driving a bargain. But what if the person would love for you to buy their house, but they can't sell it to you at the price that you need to buy it at? That's potentially where an option comes in. Potentially. You still got to do your numbers. You still got to be satisfied of the person's position. I'm going to talk a wee bit about making sure you cover yourself due diligence-wise. But there are so many things to do that at the time it happened to me, I wish I knew. I wish an investor had come up and seen my little house and said, do you know what, Trish, give us the keys. We'll take it off you for what's left on the mortgage. I'd have said, do you know what, I'm packing my bags now, mate, and out the door. Great. Pay me 1 month to move in somewhere else. Find me somewhere else to live. And I'd have been out that door. I would have been out that door. And there will be people sitting there now, I can guarantee you, there are people sitting at home now praying that someone somewhere along the line, when they speak to them, gives them that chance, even offers them that, because they don't know it exists. You may think everybody else knows about lease options and all that kind of stuff, but they don't. You know about it because you're in the industry. Most people out there wouldn't know an option if you smacked them around the head with it. Maybe it's time to smack them around the head with it a few times before they get it. There's another way for you potentially to get the deal done. It doesn't always need to be a massive big discount. It has to work for you, of course. My little favourite phrase, don't let someone else's shit become your shit. However much you care, you can't save people by going in the hole with them. You've got to stay out of the hole and show them the way out. And it's amazing what you can do. Options, exchange with delay completions. Same thing. You can exchange now, delay the completion. Maybe you've done some work to the house and added further value to the house, and you can do something later. Assisted sales is something I love. It's a very similar process. You take an option or you do a joint venture with the owner. You realise the house needs some work doing to it. You bring the house up to a better value. You sell it. There is an uplift in the value, an uplift in the sales price, which means you can cash them out. And you save yourself all of your stamp duty first. You save all of the costs that cost you to get into the deal. It's not for every deal. You've got to go through the numbers. You've got to go through the scenario to work out what's right. But if you don't know what these strategies are, now is a bloody good time to learn them. Whether it's commercial or resi or otherwise, or portfolios. You can use it for everything. And everybody's talking at title splitting at the minute. Again, it has to work on the right property. It's fashionable, but you've got to do the numbers. But you could title split a property that's suitable. And in fact, if someone's in trouble and they just need someone to cover the payments in the meantime, if you're covering the payments in the meantime, which stops the debt getting worse or stops the stress getting worse, that's one way for you to walk into a deal, minimizing your upfront costs and maximizing what your profit is going to be at the end, by helping them get a wee bit of what they want so you can get what you want. And it is all over the country. So you can make money by forcing capital. In other words, you can make more money because effectively you acquire the property, you trade it, and you flip it. We've got to be realistic on value versus, price. Price isn't always what it will value at. Anybody had a down value recently? Yeah? Significant? Reasonable? Ouchie, ouch, or holy crap? Right? I was talking to someone yesterday over the weekend. Property that she's refinancing. And I'm trying to help her kind of work out how she's going to refinance it. But the value, genuinely speaking from the estate agent, was 250,000. The valuer has valued it at 150,000, which kills her refinance. It's dead in the water. Because the chances of her going and getting another revalue at a higher level from someone else is pretty minimal. So again, price versus value, we've got to do the numbers. We've got to be really, really careful on the numbers. Obviously, you can do cash flow. You can assume the debt. In other words, you can do an option, hold the property, do something with the property. It might be an Airbnb, it might be a whatever. Got to do the numbers, you've got to work out the strategy. But you've also got to work out if the strategy you're going to use for this property is doable under the current mortgage conditions. If it's not, don't go into the deal, or at least give the person the advice. I've seen loads of people saying, I'm doing rent to rent on a buy-to-let property that we're now going to turn into an HMO. And you go, does the mortgage lender know? Because it might be okay for you, you waltz off in the sunset, whatever, but if the mortgage is breached, it could be called in, putting the person in a worse position because they probably will never get another mortgage. So you've just got to be careful that we don't put people in a worse position. Or you do both. You buy it out, and you buy the debt out, effectively. You buy the debt out. People heard of buying companies for £1? Right. It's been done in commercial and in land deals or whatever for years and years and years and years and years. We started using it for options about 10, 13 years ago. I think it was when I did my first one. So there's lots of things you can do. There's lots of tools in your toolkit that weren't in the toolkit whenever I was in trouble. Because I was in trouble 30 years ago. Sounds like a long time, but it's quick. It's amazing how quickly that's come around. Again, I want to give you just a couple of examples. I use this example all the time, and I'm going to say it's an extreme one, but it's not. Please don't assume that you're doing this on 2 up, 2 down, terrace houses or small family homes. If I gave you the profile of everybody in the UK who's in trouble, 25% of the people in the biggest trouble with their mortgages and their finances are at the higher earner, top end of the market, richest in the country. Whoops. So if you were looking to do something like this and take on a property like this, who would like something that's like that? That would be maybe a perfect Airbnb or a perfect, dare I say it, holiday let. This property, really briefly, was built by the couple that owned it. And he had spent many years working and owning a transport business. Him and his wife, 40 years in, built the house of their dreams, did everything they possibly could to look after their family, themselves, and their workforce. And every time the company struggled, he borrowed against this house to keep people in jobs. To keep people in jobs. It wasn't for himself, it was to keep people in jobs. Now, it didn't work out because he did the right thing. He said, right, it's getting too difficult, we'll move out. They moved out of the house, they moved into a rented house. And they said, we'll rent this one out. And they rented this house out to a celebrity sports person. I'm doing that. The celebrity sports person was a bit of a tube, as they say in Northern Ireland. And he didn't pay them. So the rent arrears were building up, and therefore the mortgage arrears were building up. And by the time it got to the point where it was with an estate agent friend, this is another one why you do speak to estate agents, the estate agent had said, it's gone too far, they're due for eviction. It's already been through the court. The bailiffs are coming. And I was able to work with them and come up with a solution because I knew that I had a connection that only buys multi-million-pound houses for celebrities. So it just so happened I was the right person, right place, right time, with the right intentions and the right tools. Another one of my little favourites. So I managed to advise him as to what we could do. And number one, it was go for an emergency hearing. So anybody who's facing eviction, even if it's on the day that it's due, you can have an emergency hearing at court, provided you've got a reason to go back to court. Don't go into the court and go, we'll just ask for an emergency hearing and go, please, 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 we'll have a few more months. If you're going to go in, you've got to go in with a plan. And I knew that if we went in with a plan, we probably would have a chance of getting something done with this. So what we did with this one is, number one, I had my buyer come and have a look at that house. Number two, I said, right, how much realistically can we raise if we've got to throw something at it? He said 35 grand. I went, great. And we went in, and he went into court. I didn't go, I coached him what to say, which is what I teach you guys. And that was, you go to court, you put it down to the judge, you basically say, we've got £10,000 today towards the arrears, we have a viable buyer, we can show he's interested, and we would like 6 months, please. We can show that we can afford the payments on track for 6 months. It won't chip out the arrears, but it'll chip out £10,000 towards the arrears. The judge thought about it, and I say this all the time, he went out and he had a poo. He may have had a coffee, but I always like to think he's gone out. I always like to think he's gone out to relieve himself a wee bit. You know, he's like, I need to think about this one, so I'll kind of sit there and I'll go through the papers while I'm having a seat. So I said, and they were worried. They were like, oh my God, Trish, he's gone out for a break. And I went, it's okay, it's fine. This is a good sign. This is a good sign. Because he was going to make the decision there and then, he'd have gone, no, we're done. So he came back and he said, if you can make it £15,000 towards the arrears, we'll stop the eviction today. But 6 months, if it's not done, we repossess immediately. And we got it done and bought in 5 months, within 5 months, because it needed work doing. And that buyer needed to get some work done because the celebrity person left that house in a mess. £140,000 kitchen was absolutely trashed. Cinema room that cost £80,000, trashed. Bedroom, I walked into the bedroom and the bedrooms were probably 12, 13 feet above me, and I'm looking and thinking, what is that up there above the bed? Didn't want to ask, to be honest. But the house was a mess. It was a mess. And in the end, they did win a case against this person. It was on the news, but I won't say who it was. And they got back £150,000 off this particular person. But it was going to be too late. Do you see what I mean? Timing is everything when it comes to distress, debt, and repossessions. You've got speed. Everybody else is going at the pace that they're going. So there's so many more things you can do. So if you're doing BMV, if you're genuinely buying below the market value of a house, below what the surveyor says is the value, or the valuer says is the value, please be aware that it's really important that you know if the seller is likely to go bankrupt. If you rescue them and they're going to go bankrupt anyway, you'd need to watch. Because if there's any equity in that house at all and they've given it to you effectively as your discount, they are committing an offence. And again, whoever says this when we're talking about BMV? Nobody. I think I'm the only person who ever mentions it, with the exception of Tina and Tony. You know, so if you're a sourcer and you're buying for someone else, your job should be to protect you and protect your buyer. For yourself, protect yourself. So indeed, if they're under a bankruptcy restriction order, it's easy for you to say, that can last up to 15 years. A BRO, can't say it again, a BRO or a BRU, an order and an undertaking. One is technically voluntary, but it's still, the undertaking is you agree not to be dealing in anything for the next 5, 10, 15 years. In other words, the official receiver's keeping an eye on your transactions.
Is there a register of that?
Yeah, I'm going to show you one at the end. I'm going to give you some links, it's useful. A BRO, so again, where it's an order, court-mandated order, you are not going to be allowed to dispose of any assets. It could be watches, it could be jewellery, it could be art, it could be cars, it could be whatever. Because basically, you only get one of these if you've already proved to be naughty. And selling off an asset to favour one investor or favour one creditor over someone else is an offence. It's not an offence on you to get the benefit of it, but the problem is the official receiver can look back on the transactions for 2 years after someone goes back. When someone comes bankrupt, they'll look back 2 years. If they spot any funny things going on, they'll go back further than that. And they'll look for any transactions that happened that meant assets were sold at significantly less than they were worth, and what they did with that money, right? Because you're not allowed to favour one creditor over another. So you could end, and they can challenge to get the property back. Nobody wants that. And the key timings are 2 years prior, and then if they find anything they'll go back further. So it's really important, if you are doing something where you buy below market value, please protect yourself. A simple thing you can do is get a declaration of solvency. The person says, as a result of this transaction, I will not and am not going to be bankrupt. Your solicitor should make sure they check that, okay? So in terms of finding opportunity, this is where I find opportunities, in places like this. It's really weird. People say, what's your strategy? My strategy is I talk about debt, I talk about mental health, I talk about repossessions, I talk about property, and I talk about how investors can genuinely help. It's not difficult to do those things, is it? And it's amazing when you do that, how many people want to speak to you in private. How many people want a discreet conversation at the back, at the bar, and whatever. It happens to me every single time I do a talk. It happens to me every single time I put out a post. It happens to me every single time, I send out an email. Someone says, I know someone who. And it comes from sometimes lenders. It's really weird. Lenders cannot favour one investor over another, but sometimes they will say, we really want to see what's going on. Insolvency practitioners can be useful, but they have a job to do. Malcolm, you're in the room somewhere. Where are you, Malcolm? Malcolm's got a lot of experience in this, haven't you, Malcolm, of dealing with distressed debt. So speak to the people that those people are going to be in touch with. Some of it will come through because people are getting divorced. I have one guy at the minute, and that's his scenario. He's getting divorced. The whole family finances are in disarray. He's desperately looking for a solution where his kids will be able to find somewhere, and his wife will be able to find somewhere, and he'll be able to find somewhere. But he's effectively taken one family unit apart and having to now work out how they're going to afford 2 family units when their finances are at an all-time low. So let me tell you, how am I doing for time? Am I over? Of course I am. 5 minutes? Give me the hook. Right, 5 minutes. I'm going to do this in 5 minutes. So I'll tell you why I came into this. I came into this because, as I say, way back in the 80s, I was a mental health nurse. And I look at this and I kind of go, 15 years. It seems really weird that I can say I was 15 years as a specialist in mental health, with a particular emphasis on addictions and trauma. And in spite of all of that, and in spite of the fact that I was responsible for lots of staff and what have you, in behind this lovely facade, that I was able to put out to the world of being, well up in my career and doing really well and looking after people and having a team and all that business, behind closed doors, my marriage was falling to bits. My finances were in free fall because it's really weird. People who are in debt are almost like drug addicts because you're either, an addict. If I take my dad as an example, bless him, he was an alcoholic. Drunk or sober, drunk or sober. Rich or poor, rich or poor. Happy or sad, happy or sad. And it kind of goes in cycles. So every time I got my pay at the end of the month, I put my pay in at the end of the month, and the day after I was back in my overdraft again. And the interest rates were climbing up and up and up and up and up. And it was a miserable existence. Now, the good news is, I went on to leave the NHS. I don't regret being in the NHS. I don't regret leaving. But I was able to go off and become, and set my own consulting business up. And it was through my consulting business I came into property because I wanted to grow my pension. How many here are wanting to grow a pension? Or something to fall back on as a nest egg? Many of us do that. That's where I was. But prior to all that happening, I was absolutely in bits for a long time. This was my little home in Salford. I don't know whether you can see it though. This is my little home in Salford. This was the brand new home. This is the home that virtually bankrupted me. And when we had to sell that home, this is when I found the investor who let me rent because my family was breaking up. We had to go from 1 family unit to 2 family units. Thinking, how the hell can I do that? I can't afford to pay the rent on this, never mind, or the mortgage on this. So it was sad to leave that home because I had this little boy. Bless him. That's my little boy, Connor. And that was his first birthday. And it was 5 months after his first birthday that I had to leave. And it was bloody hard. It was bloody hard. So I had to leave that home. And when I moved into that little house that I showed you, I thought, oh, great, I'm getting back on my feet. I'll be able to start again. I'll be able to do whatever. And unfortunately, every day felt like the same. It still felt like the debt was hanging over me. And for 6, 7, 8 months, I ended up meeting a new man, hadn't intended to, but he's still with me. Bless him. And And on one night when it was just like, I am working to just pay debt. I'm working that every month is still no money in the bank. I'm working for, I'll never own my own home again. I'll never be able to do anything. And I crept upstairs in that little cottage I showed you. I crept downstairs, sorry, and I hung myself off the back of our kitchen door. I took a belt, I wrapped it round a hook, and I said, that's enough. I cannot do this anymore. I cannot live with this debt anymore, and I can't see a way out. Because although I'd moved on to a new house, the house was sold, it was negative equity. I had a £10,000 negative equity debt, and then I had all the credit card debt, and I wish then I'd gone bankrupt. I wish I knew, I wish I had the balls to go bankrupt, but I didn't. My pride stopped me. My fear stopped me. I thought, if I go bankrupt, I'll lose my job. And then what? What happens to my little boy? It was horrendous, horrible, horrible, miserable existence. But Tony and Tina have seen my Banana Man suit. I actually have this Banana Man suit still. You're lucky I didn't turn up in that today. But here's what happens when you find something in yourself. And that turning point for me was trying to kill myself. I don't recommend it. I really don't. But I empathise with every person who comes to me and they say, I just need someone to listen. I just need someone to try and help me. And at the minute, I'm hitting the wall. Because the banks can only do certain things, and the solicitors can only do certain things, and the insolvency practitioners can only do certain things. They have rules in which they have to work. But you guys can make some rules. The power that's in your hands to not just buy property, but to completely change someone's life the way mine was changed, it sits in this room right now. I cannot stress enough. Because had I not had the ability to get my feet back underneath me, I would be dead, and my son would be motherless. And I think that is horrendous. I think that is the saddest thing that happens when people are in debt. And as I said to you, millions of people are in that problem now. Millions of sellers out there now. Business owners, homeowners, single parents, single dads, single mums. They are desperate for someone to say, hey, you know I buy houses? Well, I might not be able to buy it the way you want it, but what's the big problem? The big problem is making the payments. Let's have a look if we can help with that. That one conversation could be enough for someone to still be alive tomorrow morning. And that's the message that I brought when I came out with Repossession Rescue. It wasn't just about investment. By all means, go and buy a shitload of properties. But the difference that you can make is amazing. Because 100,000 people a year who are in debt attempt suicide. They do what I did. 100,000 people. 100,000. And of that, 6,000 of them will succeed. That's too many. That's homeowners. That's people who, that's the breadwinner of the house. And men are up to 6 times more likely to kill themselves as a result of debt than women. So please, even though I use this as a platform to talk about distressed assets, it is so much more important than that. You are so much more important than that because you hold the keys to fixing a lot of this. And all it takes is for you to ask a question. Can I give you the question? Here's a wee sentence I want you to remember. If you're going to make an offer to someone, say to them simply, is there any reason if I make this offer to you on your house that I could make your financial situation worse or cause it to happen? That's it. And then you shut your mouth. You don't press for an answer. You let them ask. And I can guarantee some people will go, you read my mind. And when you hear that, you know someone, it may be the first time they have spoken. Their wife, their husband, their kids may not even know. I had one guy and they were being repossessed the week later and his wife didn't know. Because he said, I said, what are you going to do? And he said, I'm just going to kill myself. Because I can't face telling her that we're being evicted next week. Horrendous. So as I say, you can save lives while being profitable and do what you do best. That's to buy more assets. That's to do the thing that you do best as investors. Be creative. Be out there. Speak to people. Network. It's phenomenal when you do a deal. Even if you don't do the deal, even if you signpost them and someone says, as a result of you speaking to me today, I'm alive, nothing in your business will ever make you feel better than when someone says, you have transformed my life. through one simple act of you knowing what you're doing. That's what's phenomenal about it. I'm going to leave it there.